Hello, I am ahead of the curve, and today I will be reviewing the book by Karen Armstrong, Muhammad, A Prophet for Our Time. This was published in 2006. So this book has been recommended to me by a few of my friends online, Muslim friends, and with them I have very, very interesting and deep conversations, so I profusely thank those, and if any of you are watching, thank you very much for being a friend of mine, and I completely love the discussions that we have on Islam, religion, atheism, and on God or whatsoever. Those discussions are intriguing, entertaining, and very surprisingly friendly. I encounter very few people who are actually negative towards me on my Instagram or even here. And so I'm so glad that we can all have a discussion that is civilized and not toxic like you'd find on the public comment section on YouTube or whatsoever. So before reading this book, and even now I would say, I was very ignorant of the Islamic tradition and the Muslim perspective. I didn't really know much about Muhammad, if not anything. And I more or less dismissed Islam as a religion just like any other. And my perspective has changed since reading this book, because I feel like Karen Armstrong just did a brilliant job at highlighting why so many Muslims find the Prophet Muhammad so inspirational and so important to history. Karen Armstrong offers us a reason to care about a man 2,000 years ago, and to take his claims seriously, and to give him the respect he deserves for the type of man he was. And it is because of this Western perspective of Islam being the home religion for terrorists. I think that is disproportionate to the truth, and I, quite frankly, disagree with the way the West treats Islam and the Quran. The West don't really understand the Quran very much. Albeit, that said, many Christians don't even understand Christianity, but that's another video. So for me, Karen Armstrong does point out where religion can actually be good in some ways, and where also there is validity to be found in particular pieces of historic content that has been preserved for years and years. And so there is evidence in this book to suggest that Muhammad was a real man. And although I won't go so far as to say that everything that is said in the book is irrefutably true, but I would go so far to say that some of it must be true. Now, I'm not exactly saying that Muhammad really did experience a revelation from God, but I am saying that the type of man Muhammad may have been is probably the man he is documented to have been. And the Quran actually was written a number of years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, and whilst this does add a texture of dubiousness to it, I do think it is astounding nevertheless of how accurate the documentations find themselves to be. Because these things can be historically checked to a degree, and so it is sort of surprising how accurate Muhammad's life actually is, historically speaking. Speaking of which, something that I was pretty happy about, and pretty, not surprised, but I was reassured by the fact that Karen Armstrong had many references, nearly on every page, of the statements she was making. And so that did encourage me to have some kind of perspective that it wasn't just hearsay. Now, of course, you can't investigate every reference that is mentioned, but at least there was some kind of evidence or some kind of account that was indicating that the statement was true. Of course, a reference doesn't say that anything is true, but it is only more true than not true without a reference. There are many things that this book does do a good job of debunking as such, and I would say one of those things that the book does debunk very well is how Islam apparently treats women very poorly. Now, I am very aware of many countries and cultures who treat their women, supposedly by the influence of the Quran and Islam, and they treat these women in a unsavoury manner. Now, of course, you could say these people aren't representing the Quran as it is intended to be, but obviously a religion and its manifestation is dealt in two ways, which is how people act it out and what it actually says in the text. And the text says that women should be treated well. It doesn't really encourage women to be treated badly at all, from what I have understood of reading this book and other accounts by my friends who happen to be Muslims. Women are to be treated as if they are a sacred being, as far as I'm concerned, in the Quran. And it is only these cultures or individuals who are representatives of Islam who treat women in the negative way that I've mentioned. So what it comes down to is the Quran not being interpreted properly. Now, I have talked about this in my God is Not Great review, written by Christopher Hitchens, and I have talked about the validity of the Quran, and I'm not really going to do that too much in this video because I feel like I've already talked about it before, and I'll probably talk about it more as I do more videos and particular types of videos, maybe exclusively on religion and whatsoever, whatever may come in the future. And so I'm not going to delve too deep in the validity of the Quran, but what I will say is that the fact that we have to interpret the Quran, whether it encourages women to not be beaten or so on and so on, I feel like it is too vague in that respect, like most religions are, or if not all religions are conveniently vague to be misinterpreted or whatsoever. That is, of course, dubious. So I will make my case in point on the fact that it's not entirely surprising that people take the Quran and any other religious scripture out of context and commit atrocities or misdeeds against women. It is not entirely surprising because I can't admit that these texts are very objective about what they're actually saying. The fact that these books have to be interpreted in the right way, and the fact that there is a right way in itself is debatable, but the fact that this has to be done does raise suspicion on whether this is actually a divine text or not. Nevertheless, what I have found is that Islam is wholly misrepresented, especially by the West, in Western media, especially from 9/11 and other political events. The Quran and Muslims, they are seen to be as worse than Christianity and Christians. And this I have no particular comment. I think the Quran, from my perspective at the moment, is more valid in the sense of it having more congruency with factual scientific evidence. But that's kind of a far stretch, but there's more than what the Bible offers anyway. But yeah, I think the Quran has slightly more validity to it than the Bible in terms of scientific understanding. But I'm not really going to go any further than that because, firstly, I'm trying not to speak of something that I am ignorant of too much, but I'm just giving you my first impressions, really. And of course there are allegations, as I've just mentioned, and myths that consist of Muhammad the Prophet being a warlord, a bloodthirsty savage, and a paedophile as well. There are these claims, and the book does address these. Something I did enjoy about this book, speaking of which, is its modesty, and it's not trying to push that the Quran is the one true religion, and it's not saying religion itself is true, and it's not saying that God exists or whatever. Karen Armstrong is just writing things down as they appear to be documented, and she's writing it in a cohesive manner. All she's doing is just writing the life of Muhammad in a story-like fashion, and many of you atheists out there will say, and yeah, story-like, yeah. Because it is a story. It should be on the fiction genre. Fair enough. I wouldn't be so bold in that because we don't know. But yeah, Karen Armstrong sets it out like it's a story, and that is something I like. It's very rereadable, and there are some quite punchy parts of Muhammad's life. Some things that strike me with incredibility, and some others that I can get on board with. But yeah, overall she does a brilliant job of writing style, and the book itself is particularly beautiful. I must admit, it is very, very nice, aesthetically pleasing book. Yeah, really cool. So to delve more on to the allegations of him being a warlord, The book does debunk this. This is because there are documented quotes of what Muhammad actually said at the time, and this obviously would be recorded by those around him who noted it down at the time of his life or even after his death, before they passed away. And so it becomes clear that when we look into the documentation that Karen Armstrong has presented, Muhammad appeared to not seek war. In fact, there is a principle in the Quran, in the Islamic tradition, that if the enemy bears down their arms, the soldiers of the Quran, the Muslim soldiers, they can't fight them anymore if the enemy surrender to them. And that is one small point. But overall, I'm saying basically that the fact that Muhammad was a warlord and that he sought out war, from my perspective of reading this book, of what Karen Armstrong is saying, that is just incorrect. As far as what I've read in this book, it is a mere tactic to smear the truth of the Quran in general, mostly by Westerners. It's mostly by Westerners who are secular, or trying to score a few points against this particular scripture. Onto a more tricky and more debatable subject is Muhammad marrying Aisha, I believe that's her name, and she was, now it's debated whether she was 5 years old at the time of her marriage with Muhammad, who was at this point middle-aged man, I believe, or 30, yeah, I think so. But anyway, he was at least 30 years older, let's put it that way. So there are debates on how old Aisha was. Some say 19, some say 15, some say 9. And overall, to be honest, what this book says in response to that is that at the time it wasn't really seen as paedophilia. It was that people died at a much younger age. So what seems to be implausible now was much more plausible then. So we have to remember the historical context behind these actions that Muhammad may have taken towards people and his wives. Now, the fact that he had 11 wives in itself is, according to the modern day and standards, quite socially unacceptable. But the way it's written in this book, how it's proposed in this book, is that Muhammad himself was widowed and he lost his wife. And if women had a man, they were likely to do much better in society. They had much more respect in the society that they lived in. And overall, they just lived better lives. So by Muhammad marrying these women, he actually enhanced their quality of being, their life. So it can be seen in that light, but obviously you could say, oh yeah, he's just a sexual pervert. I mean, you could say that, but you have to respect that there are different interpretations and documents that prove the contrary. So one question that is prominent amongst these type of messiah tales is whether these messiahs such as Jesus or Muhammad actually experienced these revelations, whether they were a divine intervention or whether they were just an illusion that they experienced. So it is of my personal opinion that Muhammad or Jesus, whoever or which messiah you wish to call upon, they were most likely just having an illusion. This is down to the fact that most individuals, if not all, were completely illiterate and not critical thinkers whatsoever. As I've said in Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, my review on that. And so these people were by nature illiterate, and they had no reason to think that it wasn't a revelation. Muhammad was not a stupid man, but he was living 2,000 years ago. So naturally, he wouldn't have been as critically intellectual as the people nowadays would be if they experienced a revelation, because now we actually have science and a measurable method of how to prove something exists or not. But I'm not saying anything objectively here, because I can't say that he was delusional, I can't say that he wasn't, but what I do know is that it is very likely that he was more than the other option, just delusional. The time itself is proof of this, but the simple truth is that we don't know, and that's the issue. A lot of these historical events, yes, there might be some kind of quotation that somebody 2,000 years ago said. But how do we know this quotation hasn't been manipulated, or it was politically misdriven, or that they just experienced something that they didn't understand and their words are not representative of the truth or reality? So in that sense, to trust something, a documentation or a quotation that was made 2,000 years ago, does ring alarm bells. And the fact that this entire book is documentations and a story derived from said documentations, the fact that there is an entire book on this and of his life, I think that's a good testament of how well received Muhammad was as an individual. But just because there's a lot of quantity does not mean that the quality is there. But again, this is all up to interpretation, but it is just my opinion that if Allah is trying to persuade me of Islam or of religion, to me, as a critical thinker, I'm not very convinced. So overall, I've really enjoyed this book. I will reread it again at some point soon, and I really like Karen Armstrong's agreeable writing style. I like that there's loads of references all over the place. I liked learning about Muhammad's life. I like the historical perspective behind it all. I just found it to be a really illuminating read, and now I feel more comfortable with myself talking about the Islamic religion and the Quran itself, and I hope to read the Quran in the future at some point as well. But I must thank my friends once again for recommending me this book to read. So thank you very much, guys. I much appreciate it, and yeah, thank you for being so available to debate or discuss these kind of things with me, because they're amongst my favourite things to do. So anyway, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much as always for watching. Check out my Goodreads and my Instagram in the links below, and remember to consider signing up to my Patreon for exclusive writings that I do, like essays on philosophy and psychology, and monthly updates and essays on anything really. I mean, the last one I did last month was that of me reading the Bible and my thoughts on that, and Christianity being examined in my writing and whatsoever, so you may enjoy that. So if that invites you enough to be my Patreon, then I'm very much pleased. So thank you once again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.